I want to give a shout out to Swing Out Museum for the Cash App donation and for the many gifted memberships he's granted. And I would also like to thank all of you who gave anonymously. And if you'd like to donate to the channel, Cash App and PayPal are available. Just let me know in the For section if it is okay for me to thank you publicly. If not, I'll assume that you prefer to remain anonymous.
And here we go.
What if a married man refused to provide for his wife, and she had to support him? What if he refused to protect her or defend her? When there was a loud noise at night, she had to go investigate why he hid with the children. What if he refused to spend any time with her, talk to her, listen to her vent, or take her out on dates? If he spent all of his free time with their children, what would be said of that man? What would his wife say to him? What would she say about him? Would she be happy in that type of marriage? What would her friends or family members advise her to do? What would their therapist at couples therapy say? What would they tell him, the husband, to do? And how does society view such a man? What type of pressure do men face when they don't treat their wives properly? That's a rhetorical question because we all know the answer. He'd be ridiculed, told that he was less than a man, told that he was derelict in his husbandly duties, and he'd be forced to do better. His friends and family members would openly chastise him, and his wife would be encouraged to leave him if he didn't. Even if he were derelict in one of the 3 areas I mentioned, but he was great at everything else, on top of being faithful to her, never sleeping with another woman, being good to their children, going to church and reading his Bible daily, he'd still be an insufficient husband. He'd still be told he had to do more as a man. There would be no excuses, no acceptable explanation for why he was deficient in any area. So he couldn't say it was because he didn't have time or because he was tired or because he was overwhelmed. We'd all say to him, find the time, find the strength, find the will to do what you're supposed to do, to make his wife happy. Because men aren't allowed to slack off. At no point can a man be allowed to refuse provision, protection, and communication with his wife. He's never allowed to ignore her basic needs, because men are constantly held accountable. As the phrase that's been drilled into our head goes, happy wife, happy life. She comes first at all times, even at the expense of his needs. But what happens when a wife slacks off? When she's derelict in her duties? What happens when she deprives her husband of basic needs, like physical intimacy? What does society tell her? And what options are her husband presented with if she refuses to improve? And today, for the 205th chapter of the Laymans Journal, that's what we're going to discuss, as we break down I Think I Love My Wife, a movie written, directed, and starring comedian Chris Rock, along with Kerry Washington, Gina Torres, and Steve Buscemi. So, let's get it. Before I get started, I'd like to open up with a scripture verse. It takes place in the New Testament, in the book of Corinthians. Now, Corinthians is a book based on a series of letters written by the Apostle Paul to the body of believers living in Corinth, which at that time was a Roman-controlled city. They were having issues with the basics of the faith, one of them being the role of physical intimacy in marriage, because Corinth was a highly secular, hedonistic, decadent city. It was a Western transient town of former slaves, sailors, and merchants from across the world. And there was no religion or moral code, particularly when it came to newly freed slaves. You see, when they were being held captive, they weren't allowed to marry, and the wealthy elites that owned them practiced a warped form of marriage. Basically, they did whatever they wanted, whatever felt good, especially in regards to physical intimacy. Now, I don't have to go into detail, but if you know anything about the ruling class of Rome, you know how they used to get down in the bedroom. And it gave them a bad understanding of marriage and physical intimacy. Based on what they saw from their masters, they thought it was a bad thing, something Christians shouldn't do. So many of them were practicing celibacy in marriage. Husbands and wives weren't sleeping with each other. So Paul had to write a series of letters to the church in Corinth to help them understand that intimate relations between a man and his wife are normal and healthy. In fact, he thought they were necessary. And starting at chapter 7, verse 2, he writes, "Because the temptation of immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement, for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Skipping down to verse 9. For it's better for a man to marry than to burn with passion. So Paul is saying, don't practice celibacy in marriage. Don't deny each other physical intimacy. He says, wife, your body belongs to your husband. Husband, your body belongs to your wife. You don't have the right to withhold what isn't yours. But if both of you, not just one of you, both of you agree not to do it, that's okay. But only if you're doing it to focus on God, but only for a short period of time. Because temptation will cause you to sin. And it's better to marry and have relations in marriage than single burning with lust. Now I want you to keep all of that in mind as we go forward. So, I Think I Love My Wife is the story of a young married couple, Richard and Brenda. They're in their early 30s with 2 young children, and they have a problem.
I'm bored out of my mind. Now, I'm sure I'd have a much rosier outlook on life if my wife and I actually had sex, but there always seems to be something wrong.
No, my face hurts. It's not your birthday.
We both work, we're both tired, but that's no excuse. To be honest, I don't know how much more of this I can take.
That's right, they have a dead bedroom. Brenda is practicing celibacy in marriage, and she's forcing her husband to do the same. But it wasn't always like that. When Richard and Brenda were dating, before they were married and had kids, she was all about getting it in.
I can't wait to suck your
And since she's become a wife and a mom,
these lips were made to praise Jesus.
Things have dried up. She doesn't want to do it anymore. Now they've tried counseling to remedy the problem, but to no avail.
Richard, do you think perhaps you work too much?
Oh, no. I work too. I do, but I come home from work and I have to take care of the kids and I have to take care of you. And frankly, I'm tired.
Too tired to wear a nice pair of panties?
What's wrong with my panties?
They're huge! You know, the biggest thing on a pair of panties should be the tag. That's all I want to see. Tag and ass. Tag and ass.
You see? This is what I'm talking about. You see how insensitive he is?
You know, Brenda, maybe I'd be more sensitive if you'd have sex with me. It seems like the only time she wants to have sex with me is to make a baby.
The only time you want to make a baby with me is to have...
That doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's because I'm tired.
Now we're making progress.
I hated that therapist. She wasn't married and didn't have any kids. You know, when you're on a plane, you kind of want a pilot with more experience than you. But maybe that's just me.
Now there are 2 things I want to highlight in this scene. One are Brenda's excuses. She says work and having to take care of kids and a husband makes her too tired for it. And I understand that argument. Doing all of that can keep a woman from getting into the mood because she's working 2 full-time jobs, and that can overwhelm her. But that's a BS point for Brenda to make, because she's an elementary school teacher, and Richard is a high-level executive. Now, he's not a millionaire, but he does make a lot of money, enough to support his family on one income. And he's got 2 secretaries. That means he's a very important man, a profitable man. All of this could be resolved if she simply quit her job and focused on being a housewife. Then she wouldn't be so tired. She'd have the time and energy to please her husband. But notice how Brenda prioritizes her time and energy. She'd rather go to work and put her kids in daycare to earn an income they don't need than pleasing her husband. And that's a reoccurring theme in the movie, the way Brenda wastes her time and energy. Later in the movie, she forces Richard to take her and the kids into the city so they can spend the day shopping. That's a waste of time, energy, and money. But she makes time, saves money, and reserves energy to do it. Then she talks about wanting to build a shed in the backyard.
This is a project an experienced do-it-yourselfer could tackle, since this shed is pre-cut and ready to assemble. Hey, fellas! Hi, how are you guys? Very well, thanks.
That doesn't look so hard. We can do that out back.
For reasons who knows why. So she's got the time, energy, and money to do everything, but taking care of her husband's needs. That's why the I'm tired from work and taking care of kids argument is nonsense. And 2, Richard hates couples therapy because he doesn't like the therapist. This is a common theme among men. We tend to hate therapy because therapy is quickly becoming, or has become, a female-serving profession, with 3 out of 4 therapists being women. And it's trending further in that direction. And oftentimes it's practiced from a woman's perspective, as a lot of times men are told that we're the problem. Dr. T. Hasan Johnson has a brilliant series on celibate marriages. I'll post a link in the description, be sure to check them out. But he tells a fascinating story about a conversation he had with an associate going through it.
Necessarily know why people send me all these things. I'm not a sex expert. I don't claim to be, not a therapist, but I do want to support Black men, talking about the issues they grapple with, even if people don't think they should. Maybe that's why they sent them to me. But this brother was saying this was pretty rare in their relationship anyway for years. And it's been all kinds of difficult for him to grapple with. And he's been trying to, but she was already pretty withdrawn. And they've gone to counseling. And one of the things I noticed just right off, when I asked him about counseling and what it really seemed to do was teach him how to empathize with her. That was about all he could do. They went because the intimacy was an issue. The lack of sex on his part was a major issue. And, this was, of course, a female therapist. The therapist and the wife made the issue about how she feels and what's going on with her. And they kind of pressured him into prioritizing her feelings. And at no point did they get around to the issue that brought them there, which was his frustration about the lack of intimacy and sex in the marriage. So what he had actually learned how to do when he was talking to me about it was prioritize how she felt. And I had to keep stopping him and say, look, man, I don't want to hear that again. I've already heard it. How do you feel? And he had trouble articulating it. Why? Because one of the things that they did is they taught him how to feel guilty. How to feel guilty about having needs, about having things he wanted to do that didn't necessarily fit what she was interested in, right? So that said, I was really kind of forcing him to spit out his frustration because he'd learned to sit on it, to swallow it, to hide it as if it didn't exist. And I found that interesting. This is therapy. So be careful. Therapy is important. I find therapy to be very useful, especially if you're the right counselor. But beware, especially if you're in a relationship counseling kind of setup. And I've talked about this before. If you're in a situation where you're in that kind of dynamic and both the counselor and the wife, focus solely on forcing you to prioritize her needs and feelings, and somehow yours become invisible. That's ridiculous. Don't let it happen. Now, if there's a stage in the therapy session where that's taking place, nothing wrong with that. But if that's the primary mode of it, it's a problem. And when you look at the Duluth model and how it's been taught for years in terms of prioritizing this idea that men are inherently patriarchs and problematic, and that even when female abusers initiate abuse, it's really in some kind of response to patriarchy. This is how many therapists and counselors are trained. And so you have to be able to challenge that and advocate for yourself if you are in that position. And be unapologetic about making sure that your needs are going to be addressed. I just want to put that out there. And I noticed that in him. You know what I mean? He struggled with trying to tell me what he was going through. But when he finally got it out, he was like, yeah, I said, well, has anything changed in terms of intimacy and after the last couple of years of therapy? He said, no. I said, well, I disagree. He said, why? I said, well, it sounds to me like the one thing that's changed is you've learned to talk about it differently.
And prior to sharing that story, Dr. Hasan had a discussion with Dr. Brandon Gamble, who shared his experience in going to therapy with his ex-wife for the celibate marriage that was imposed on him.
So that's a problem. One of the other problems I had is when we did look for counseling, there was a bevy of Black female counselors. There weren't very many Black male counselors, but there was
1%. Black men make 1% of most psychologists.
There we go. So here's the thing that got me though. When your wife can look over at you, despite whatever she's going through, and say, wow, this counselor is really biased against men. That tells you something, right? You know what I mean? So there's this bevy of counselors that have this training that in many ways is rooted in a kind of misandrous framework where men are, conceptualized to be the seat of the problem, and they approach even marital counseling from this standpoint where you walk into a room and immediately becomes about what you didn't do for her before you even investigate what the issues both people have. And so again, when your wife can say that and you're sitting there stupefied, that tells you how bad. So that was a whole another kind of element to this. But I think the biggest thing for me is when you're married, it can feel like you're trapped in a way.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here, because I got to the point where I was I didn't realize I had like ideation, but I was very, very depressed.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so at the end of that, I have all these images and other thing, but I pushed through and do what I had to do. But my ex, she wanted us to go to counseling. So we did. And it was interesting for her because she called the counselor. She saw it as my problem. Right. Okay. As the issue identified within me. And this is what the therapist was also saying. She's like, no, let's work on this together. But I think the other challenge was because there's so few good counselors. And I got to admit, I'm a hard patient in that I already know psychology. So I'm a few steps ahead. And I'm also like, how well are you trained in Black psychology?
That's right.
All these other pieces. Man, but one of the things that the therapist did, and I really didn't catch on it, is that the therapist, and I'm saying this for folks who are going to counseling now, watch out for this, that if the therapist is doing couples counseling, they really shouldn't be doing individual counseling. Because the focus should be on the couple. But we didn't have that. And that created like a skewed perspective. So if you're a woman and the woman is doing the counseling with the woman, it creates this perspective, just like you're talking about. There's something wrong with the man. And so I felt all the burden to fix everything, but this was two of us. But from my perspective, I'm like, man, there's nothing I can do. I'm doing everything that goes even against the odds. I'm a Black man who walked into a therapist's office. I am willing to go for a year. I'm paying for all of the co-pays to show up to meet with this person, to have them talk at me about what I'm doing and what I need to fix.
Right.
Again, please check out Dr. T's channel. The link is in the description. Also, Richard is quick to point out the fact that the therapist herself isn't married and thus can't understand what they're going through. Yet she's supposed to be qualified to give them marriage advice. And it reminded me of that Cheesecake Factory date. You know, the story that's gone viral about the woman who refused to get out of the car because her date took her to the Cheesecake Factory and she was, quote, too good for the Cheesecake Factory. Now, I've heard the video was fake, scripted, or staged, but this is the Layman's Journal, and you know the theme of this channel. Entertainment media is more than entertainment, it's propaganda through art. The stories may be fake, but the messages behind the stories are always real. For good or bad, better or worse, the goal is to influence your mind, challenge your way of thinking to affect culture. Whether it's staged or not, the meaning behind the video is real. The woman is giving relationship advice, telling single women to reject men who don't spoil them on the first date. And I bring that up because the woman in that video, on top of being delusional, is a licensed therapist. So like the therapist in I Think I Love My Wife, she's in no position to be telling any woman anything. Yet here she is spreading the disease of her ignorance on others as a social media influencer and a licensed therapist. I digress. So later in the movie, Richard makes another excellent point. Not only is his wife denying him his marriage rights, but she expects him to be faithful.
How can my wife not have sex with me and then send me out into a world with so many beautiful women? It's like dropping me into the ocean and expecting me to not get wet.
Richard then confesses that he's accepted the idea that he and his wife won't be doing the do.
There were days when Brenda and I got along great, but we still weren't having sex. When a married couple stops having sex, at first they complain about it, but after a while, they get used to it. She walks out of the shower, you don't even look, because you know there's nothing there for you. The most dangerous time in a marriage is when the couple accepts that they're not having sex.
And that's when Nikki True, or as 1 Corinthians chapter 7 calls, temptation arrives. You see, Nikki is an old friend of Richard from college. She dated his best friend, and as they're catching up on old times, she immediately starts flirting with him, asking him probing questions, wondering if he's happily married.
Brian, and that's my daughter, Kelly.
Same mother?
Same mother, my wife, 7 years.
No side kids?
No side kids. I know, it's very white of me.
Richard, Marcus Cooper is married. Tied the knot till death do you part.
Something strange about that?
Just not the Richie I knew.
People change.
You happily married?
Yeah, I'm happily married.
No, you're not. You didn't say it right.
Okay, how was I supposed to say it?
I don't know. But you're not supposed to think about it. I hear ice cracking.
What?
You ever walk across a frozen river and hear ice cracking? It's the scariest sound in the world.
Obviously, she's in man-stealing mode. And it's from this point forward that Nikki keeps harassing Richard. She keeps showing up at his job, calling him at work, asking him for favors, and wanting to hang out with him. All movie long, she monopolizes his time. And the thing about Nikki is, she's fun. She's the perfect girlfriend. She allows Richard to see what life would be like if he was with her. Now, Nikki is an exceptionally beautiful woman. I still can't believe that's Kerry Washington. And even though I don't care for the smoking or the demon mop on her head, she's physically everything a man could ask for. The problem is, Nikki isn't wife material. She's a fun girl. She went to college with Richard, but somehow she has no work skills. She's 32. And the only job she qualifies for is as a restaurant hostess. So she's been riding the carousel for the past decade, hopping from peen to peen. And she's currently riding a club promoter named Teddy. So she doesn't exude any of the characteristics that a man looks for in a wife. She's not warm, nurturing, or shows any signs of maternal instincts, or evidence that she can be a monogamous partner. And now she's chasing after a married man, asking him if he's still screwing his wife.
I live on the west side with Teddy. He has a place here and in D.C., although most of my stuff is in D.C.
So how'd you meet Teddy from D.C.?
He's a club promoter. I met him out. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
So do I know your wife?
I don't think so.
Is she white?
No. Well, why would you ask that?
Don't get offended. So do you and your black wife still
And what's it to you?
It's just curious. Most of the people I know who are still married say that after a while they don't.
That's not a wife to me. That's a weekend or vacation girl. You better always wear a condom girl. She's a side chick at best, a wild animal, something you admire in its natural habitat, but you better not bring home or attempt to build a life with, and God forbid, break up your family for. It's better to be in a celibate marriage with a woman like Brenda than in a relationship with a woman like Nikki. At least Brenda is safe, stable, loyal, and a good mother. She won't invite chaos into your life.
Okay, Teddy, calm down. You know you got 2 strikes. There's cops all over the place.
How the y'all getting in, man? Huh? Who the are you? Huh? What, this the you f***ing him now? Huh? You the new man?
No, I'm not the new. I've never been a. I'm just a friend. How's it going, Richard Cooper?
Yes, that's the late Michael Williams, also known as Omar from The Wire. He plays Teddy, Nikki's ex-club promoting boyfriend. Yet somehow Nikki is turned on by what just happened and kisses Richard. That's why I presume Richard, in spite of how bad things are going with Brenda, is so hesitant to be with Nikki. He's attracted to her, but he at least knows she's not a stable woman, not a normal woman. Another interesting aspect in the movie is how Richard faces the pressure to stay faithful. All movie long, we see Richard's co-workers giving Nikki the stink eye because they don't like her. They know she's trying to break up Richard's marriage. They know that's the reason she keeps showing up at the office. And eventually one of his co-workers, George, gives him some sound advice.
Are you aware of what you're getting yourself into? What are you talking about? Nikki, she's here every day. George, she's just a friend. Friend? Come on, I've had friends before. They don't look like Nikki. Look, you got a good situation at home. You got 2 kids.
I'm not f***ing her.
No, she's f***ing you. You just don't know it.
I can't believe I'm hearing this from you, of all people. You cheat on your wife all the time. Last year, you were Tracy and Mary. I didn't say shit to you.
That's different. I don't give a f***. I can f*** a girl, go home, kiss my wife goodnight, and sleep like a baby. You, on the other hand, got emotions. You're like Captain Sable, right? You like to be needed, and that knows it.
Are we done?
I'm not getting in your shit, all right? I just... Be careful, okay?
You see, Richard is not the cheating type. He's a family man, a relationship man. He doesn't have what it takes to cheat on his wife. He doesn't have what it takes to handle a woman like Nikki. And I would also add, cheating means losing Brenda. Losing Brenda means losing the kids. And Nikki isn't worth any of that, as she brings nothing but lust to the table. Now, I'm not saying that Richard should accept the BS that Brenda is putting him through. What I'm saying is, he shouldn't leave Brenda for Nikki. He should leave her for another woman, And I'm getting ahead of myself, so more on that later. And after everything that's been going on, Brenda is getting suspicious. And I get her being upset, wondering if her husband is cheating. But she still isn't offering to break her celibacy within the marriage. And Richard, although he hasn't cheated, is still allowing Nikki to complicate his marriage. And if that isn't bad enough, things blow up at work.
High grading online. Is that you? It's me. I probably should have.
Richard, I have an emergency. I need to ask you something, but I'm afraid you're gonna get mad at me.
I have to take this. Excuse me, I'll be right back. Hey, what's up? I can't really talk right now. I'm in a meeting.
Okay, really quick, just promise you won't get mad at me. Will you come with me to get my stuff out of Teddy's apartment?
Didn't you hear me tell you I'm in a meeting?
Not today, tomorrow.
Fine. Okay, I gotta go now.
Have a good meeting.
Oh, and what were your plans?
All right, so where's this guy live? Because I got things to do.
Shuttle's in like 45 minutes.
Shuttle? What are you talking about, shuttle?
To D.C. Remember I told you we have a place there and he's out of town, so now I can get my...
I'm not going with you to D.C.
You promised.
Look, we don't have all day.
I'm sorry, Mr. Udi. I'm sure Mr. Cooper will be here in a moment with the prospectus.
But I have been working very closely with Mr. Cooper on this, and I'm prepared to walk us through. If you take a look at page 2, I'm sorry, page 3, performance chart for 19.
Cooper, you're a good banker. You brought a lot of money to this company. Do you think you've brought a lot of money into this company?
Yeah, I brought some money in.
Well, in all the years you've been here, you brought in close to $20 million. That's a lot of money, right? Right?
I guess so.
See this quarter? See it?
Yes, I see it.
This quarter is you. This is $20 million. You see this table? This is Pupkin and Langford. This is $800 million. This is your value to the company. You're on probation. Any more problems, you're fired. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
You know, Cooper, you can lose a lot of money chasing women, but you'll never lose women chasing money.
Again, Richard receives sound advice. You can lose a lot of money chasing women, but you'll never lose a woman chasing money. And he's right. Never put a woman above your purpose, because women like Nikki are destructive. They're a distraction to your goals, but the good news is they're replaceable. There are millions of Nikkis out there, but your purpose, that thing you were put on this earth to do, is irreplaceable. And Brenda, even though she shut things down in the bedroom, never kept Richard from being productive. And it's at that point that Richard tries to get a grip on things.
I got lucky. I still had my job, I still had my family. All I had to do was one thing.
Nikki is on line 1.
Tell her I'm not here.
He decides to cut Nikki off. He stops taking her calls, he stops hanging around her, and he focuses on his job and his marriage. But it's not over. Eventually he gives in. He goes to see Nikki, and this time he isn't confused about what he wants. He wants to sleep with her, and he isn't hesitant. Now, when I first saw this, my modern church-inspired simp chip kicked in. I thought Richard was being weak. He was being a scoundrel for trying to cheat on his wife. But then I had to remember what the Bible actually teaches on the issue, not what the feminists and pulpit panderers push in the modern church. Going back to the scripture I quoted earlier, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, starting at verse 2. But because of the temptation of immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, so that Satan may tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So while Richard was trying to do the right thing and cutting Nikki off, and focus on his marriage, Brenda was not holding up her end of the bargain. She was still pushing celibacy on them. Her and Richard still weren't sleeping together. She was still denying him what he needed. What the Bible says, what the Word of God says isn't right, because the wife doesn't have authority over her own body. She can't deny the husband his marital right. And she, Brenda, is putting Richard, the husband, in a position where he can be tempted. So all of this is Brenda's fault. She, not Richard, not Nikki, is the villain of the movie. She's the reason why Richard is creeping back to Nikki. She's wrecking her home. But getting back to the film. During the time that Richard was ghosting Nikki, she finds a new boyfriend, some guy named Compassion. But she still wants to hang out with Richard, and she invites him to a club to meet her boyfriend. Now, none of this makes sense. Why would a married man want to hang out with an unstable woman to meet her new boyfriend at a club, on the chance that he might get some cutty from her, even though she's with someone else? It doesn't make sense to me. But Richard, thinking with his meat, follows through with the plan, goes home and starts a fake argument with his wife.
Chicken?
Yes. What is wrong?
Chicken again? We have chicken every day. I'm tired of chicken.
I thought you liked chicken.
I like it, but I don't like it every day. I mean, I feel like I got feathers coming out my ass.
All right, this isn't about chicken because I know you like chicken.
No. You know what this is about? This is about all the other animals out there that are dying to be eaten that we don't eat. Have you ever heard of lamb chops? Have you ever heard of pork chops? Can a nigga get a taco?
Are you crazy?
I'm losing my finger-licking mind right now eating all this chicken. I can't take it anymore. Chicken hawks don't eat this much chicken. You know what? I'm gone. I can't take it. I can't take it.
Where were you going?
To get some duck.
And of course, Nikki stands him up. She doesn't show up at the club, and Richard spends the night drinking, smoking, and dancing with strangers. Remember, Nikki is a chaotic, unreliable woman. She's not wife material, she's a fun girl, a woman you can't build with. Now Brenda begins to suspect that the argument she had with Richard was fake, because he's been gone for a long time. And while he's away, she begins to suspect that he's cheating. So like a mad woman, she starts looking for evidence. She starts going through his things. But aside from finding a dirty picture, which upsets her, she finds nothing, no evidence of Richard cheating. And that right there bothers me. You see, I'm not a proponent of adult material, but how can Brenda be upset with Richard seeking an outlet for a situation she put him in? Keep in mind, this is a woman that expects her young husband, her young healthy husband, to honor a celibate marriage with monogamy against his will. And it blows my mind how she thinks he's supposed to just accept this, to be content with it, because she says no at his expense, even to the extent that a picture sets her off. Anyway, I digress. So Richard finally comes home and they have a brief fight. She doesn't believe him, but she has no evidence and they drop it. But the next day Richard calls Nikki and leaves her a voice message.
Nikki, Richard, I don't know what happened to you last night and I don't really care. I'm married, you're single. Don't call me, don't come by the office, don't email me, don't fax me. Just leave me the alone. You got it? Just leave me the alone. Thank you.
But there's some good news that comes after the club incident. Later, Richard, feeling guilty, takes Brenda out on a date. It goes well, they go home, and it looks like they're gonna finally get it in. But she falls asleep, leaving Richard with an angry boy. But Richard is still committed to being the good dad and husband. He's spending time with Brenda and the kids, and still going to therapy because Brenda won't give him any. Now Brenda is fine with that, but Richard is still annoyed, even though he pretends that he isn't.
Glad you two are making such progress. I wasn't sure we'd make it this far.
Yeah, I just decided to stop complaining about all the things I didn't have and start appreciating the things I did.
That is what I want to hear from both of you, getting along and appreciating what you have. So, how are things physically?
Oh, well, we're not quite having sex yet. But hey, we are getting along and it's not all about sex, right?
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to appreciate the nonsense that we're having. You know, you don't have to have sex to show somebody you love them.
I see.
What you writing?
Oh, nothing.
But he wants to keep Brenda happy. And in the midst of all that, the devil returns, temptation returns, Nikki returns. But this time she's getting engaged. Now Richard can't believe it, as he asks Nikki if this is really what she wants.
I have a fiance now, Sean.
Get out of here. You're getting married?
Yeah.
Nikki True is walking down the aisle?
I'm closing the deal. Sean is in real estate.
What happened?
Well, I was at this party. I was talking to this guy. I don't even remember what we were talking about. And this little 22-year-old girl walks by. And he was like, oh, excuse me, I gotta... And it hit me. You know, I'm 32 years old. I'm the old club now. I think it was the first time in my life I was talking to a man who wasn't even thinking about me. So then I met Sean, and I said to myself, I gotta make this work. So we're getting married in June, and I want you to meet him.
Wow.
Let me get this. You always get it.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
And she admits right here, she doesn't love or even like her fiancé, but she shows up because she allegedly wants Richard to meet him. So Richard meets Nikki's fiancé, and it's some fat, short, pear-shaped dude, someone she wouldn't normally be attracted to. She's only with him because she's run out of options. She's settling for him because she can't do any better. She's gotten old. The man she wants doesn't want her anymore. And she's desperate and doesn't make enough money to care for herself. That's the reason why she came sniffing around Richard, and the only reason why she's settling to marry Sean, her fiancé. But best believe, if she were 10 years younger, or if she made enough money to care for herself, she wouldn't give either of them the time of day. Later, Richard and Nikki discuss her getting married again, and Richard asks again if this is really what she wants. And again, she shows that she doesn't like, love, or even want her fiancé.
This is what you want. You're getting married. Do you love him?
Do I love him? In a few years, maybe. I'm gonna be like you, I'm gonna have a nice house, a nice husband, a couple kids, a nice, easy, dull, boring life. And I will never again have to live in a tiny-ass studio apartment.
Come on, don't hurt the guy.
What do you care? You hurt?
Don't go there.
You started it. Do I love him? We could be really happy together, you and me. Don't you want to be happy?
My life's not about what I want.
I hear ice cracking. Careful not to drown, Richie.
So you see Nikki's true intent. She just wants the provision. She doesn't even like her fiancé. And one more time, she pleads her case for her and Richard to be together. And Richard rejects the notion. But Nikki doesn't give up. She makes him another offer.
So Sean leaves for LA in the morning. I don't leave till Wednesday. So why don't you come by tomorrow and we can have a proper goodbye?
You know, Nikki, I'm not sure.
I will call you with the address, and I will see you at 2.
And there you have it. Nikki thinks she can use her kitty to change Richard's mind. She disguises it as a, quote, proper goodbye. But it's my conjecture that she wants Richard. That's why she came back to New York. That's why she tries to convince him that he's not happy with his wife. That's why she tries to monopolize his time. But Richard, still starved for action because Brenda isn't giving him any, agrees to the proper goodbye. Now it's important to note on the eve of his affair, Brenda finally comes around and offers him some. But at this point it's too late. He's committed to cheating on her with Nikki. So Richard goes over to Nikki's place. Things get hot and steamy, and it looks like he's finally going to do it. He's going to sleep with Nikki. But at the last moment he decides not to. He leaves and never sees Nikki again. He runs home to Brenda, and they reconcile with some corny love song, agree to have some adult time, and the movie ends. Now prior to doing this review, I had never seen this movie before. But the reason why I chose to do an in-depth review is because the topic fascinated me. I'm not, nor have I ever been married, so I'm not speaking from experience. But the idea of being stuck in a celibate marriage terrifies me. Because I have a traditional Western understanding of marriage. I define marriage as a lifelong monogamous union between one man and one woman, with physical intimacy being the primary draw. Of course, I accept the fact that at some point when I'm too old, the intimacy will stop. But Richard and Brenda were a young couple in their early 30s. They were way too young to be going through this. She wasn't an ailing or postmenopausal woman, and he wasn't sick and struggling with ED. Yet she's actively choosing to deny her husband his marriage right. But as bad as that is, I've heard worse. There are married men in their 20s who've experienced this, with wives that are younger than them. And that blows my mind. It terrifies me. I can imagine being a young man with a young, healthy wife and being denied my God-ordained right, while simultaneously being told I can't seek other arrangements. And to piggyback Dr. T. Hasan Johnson's take on the issue, a man only has 3 options when confronted with a celibate marriage. He can step outside the marriage and exercise other options, divorce, or suffer through it. Now, cheating or exercising options only works for high-value or high-earning men. As women who marry these types of men know, it comes with the territory, and they have to tacitly accept it, as men of that caliber don't normally limit themselves to one woman. And if things go south, they can afford a divorce. And if they have kids, they have the resources to sue for joint or full custody. So marriage isn't a major risk for them. A woman can't trap them in a celibate marriage. And speaking of divorce, that's a viable option for a young man in a marriage with no children, because they can start all over again and recoup whatever's been lost. But for men like Richard, men with young children, divorce means being apart from them as they're going through their developmental years, which are the most crucial years for a child. But even for men who wait until their children are grown, that still isn't a viable option, as those men tend to be older and risk losing half their assets. And that's a scary proposition for a man in his mid-50s who's nearing retirement. Then they're suffering through it, accepting at a young age that life in the bedroom is essentially no more, save some special occasions. And unfortunately, that's the fate that many men face, which is why the concept of marriage terrifies a lot of men. They'd rather go through a series of casual relationships where there is zero risk of being trapped in a celibate marriage. My second thought on the movie is, there needs to be a sequel. And if I were in charge, I'd call it I Think I Hate My Wife. Because this movie was filmed 16 or 17 years ago, and a lot has changed since then. The biggest being Chris Rock. He was married with young kids at the time that he wrote this script, and has since divorced. And I don't believe he was writing this from a point of ignorance or theoretics. I think he was writing from his own frustrations with his own marriage. And it would be interesting to see if his perspective on marriage has changed, if the updated version of Richard would still be married to Brenda. My conjecture is he wouldn't, because I think Chris Rock is Richard in real life. And if you think about it, Richard didn't win at the end of the movie. There was no happily ever after. Yes, he went back to his wife, and they agreed to have intimacy at that moment, but there was no real resolution. She didn't change or agree to go back to the way things used to be. She gave him a little pity kitty in the end, and the movie made it clear. Richard's decision to return to Brenda had more to do with Nikki than it did Brenda, because again, Nikki isn't wife material. She's not a woman you can build a family with. But if Nikki were a better woman, if she were submissive, nurturing, safe, reliable, showed maternal instincts, and traits of being a monogamous woman, I believe he'd have left Brenda for her. Because if all things are equal, no man would stay in a celibate marriage if he can help it. But the primary reason why Richard returns to Brenda is because of his kids. It was him looking up at the mirror the moment that he was going to lay with Nikki, remembering the fun that he had playing with them, that stopped him from sleeping with her. And I believe if he didn't have children, he'd have slept with Nikki. He may not have married her, but he would have definitely cheated on Brenda and run the risk of getting a divorce. It wasn't Brenda that kept him in the marriage, it was his children. So I'm going to end things right here, but before I go, follow me on my other social media platforms. And if you like this video, please share the link on your social media platforms. That, more than anything, would be a huge help in getting the word out. But most importantly, check out the other videos in my library, as I'm sure there's something there you'll enjoy. Here's a preview of my latest work. Before I get started, I want to open with a scripture reference from the book of Hosea. Now, Hosea was a prophet born at a time when the nation of Israel was split into 2 kingdoms. You had the house of Judah in the south and the house of Israel in the north. And Hosea lived in the north where life was good. For 200 plus years, their kingdom flourished under God's protection. They knew nothing but wealth, peace, and prosperity. But the people were evil. In spite of everything God had done for them, how he had blessed them and protected them, they were unfaithful. They were worshiping other gods. making treaties with nations who were the enemies of God, and paid no attention to his commandments or laws. They were essentially doing what they wanted to do, with no regard for how well God had blessed them. And after generations of disrespect, God had finally had enough. He was going to drop the hammer down on them, bring judgment upon their wicked ways. And he used the prophet Hosea as his mouthpiece. And because the punishment was going to be harsh, God needed Hosea to be 100% on board so that he wouldn't be reluctant in delivering the message. He wanted Hosea to experience the pain and anguish the northern kingdom had brought him. And he does this by using the analogy of a marriage ruined by repeated infidelity. So in Hosea chapter 1, starting with verse 2, it says, "When the Lord began speaking to Israel through Hosea, he said to him, 'Go and marry a so that some of her children will be conceived in.'" This will illustrate how Israel has acted like a by turning against the Lord and worshiping other gods. And Hosea does just that. He goes out and marries a woman named Gomer. And in verses 3 through 8, she does exactly as God predicted. Gomer cheats on Hosea and has 3 children by other men, all while she was married to Hosea, which is the way that God saw Israel when they worshiped other gods. He says in chapter 2, verse 10, Israel was a shameless who became pregnant in a shameful way. Sorry folks, that's a mistake. It's verse 5, not verse 10. And in verse 13, he says, "She, Israel, put on her earrings and jewels and went out to look for her lovers. But me she forgot." Now later in the story, Gomer ends up selling herself into slavery, and Hosea has to pay her debt. He has to buy her back. He has to, quote, redeem her from her captors, and he reconciles with her. It's a beautiful analogy or metaphor about the forgiving nature of God, about how he, regardless of what we've done, will always forgive our sins and redeem us from our captors. And that's the religious spiritual moral of the story. God is merciful. He loves us unconditionally. He'll do anything for us, regardless of what we've done. And it is not, I repeat, not relationship advice. Again, it's about what God is willing to do for us, not what a man should do for a woman. Now, it's a shame I have to say that because I cannot tell you how many times I've heard pastors use Hosea as a template for the way a man should forgive his cheating wife. I personally know a man who was told this. When his wife cheated, he went to the church for counseling, and the pastor and the deacons told him he needed to be like Hosea and reconcile with his wife.
What kind of shit is that?
Needless to say, he left his wife and the church because that's BS. It's biblical malpractice. It's part of that conditioning I was talking about earlier. The modern church engages in it, which is why so many men have walked away. But yeah, that's the opposite of what a man should do. And it's the opposite of what the book of Hosea teaches. From a practical perspective, it's a life lesson, a warning on why men should not choose loose women. Because as a man, you can't change her. Whoever she was before you married her is who she'll be afterwards. And God is saying, she'll do to you what Israel did to me, what Gomer did to Hosea. And in the words of the incomparable J. Cole,
she don't wanna be saved, don't save her. She don't wanna be saved, don't save her. She don't wanna be saved.
And the movie Casino embodies that perfectly. That's all I have to say about it. What do you have to say about it? Leave a comment in the comment section and let's have a conversation. Okay, so you've heard me say this a million times. So if you like this video, please give it a like and leave a comment in the comments section and share the link on your social media platforms. And if you are new to my channel, please subscribe and turn on that notification bell. That way you'll get alerts every time I upload new content. This is the Layman's Journal. Thanks for stopping by. I'm out.
Hell! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
And while I do appreciate you sharing, subbing, and leaving comments, I'm going to ask that you take another step further in keeping the channel going. I set up a membership plan for those of you who would like to offer further support in the development of this channel. It's not anything expensive or special. I'm just asking for 99 cents a month, which is enough for me to continue doing the work that I do here.
Help me! Help me! Help me!
In the future, there will be additional tiers with added benefits, but for right now, I just need your support so that I can cover basic costs. So please, sign up so I can continue bringing you awesome content. This is the Layman's Journal. I'm out.